This is the famous painting known as Lady with an Ermine by Leonardo da Vinci, and one of the many things that stands out about it is the eyes. They're so real. But the subject of this video is not her or even Leonardo. It's the artist who trained him, the brilliant sculptor and painter Andrea del Verrocchio. You see, when Leonardo was 15 years old, he became the apprentice of Andrea del Verrocchio, one of the greatest artists of the Renaissance. And today we will talk about how this happened, and why this is such an important event in art history, but also because this Florentine workshop at the time was kind of like Hogwarts for young artists. We will also discuss how Leonardo left school at age 12 with barely any classical education, what exactly he learned during his 2 years of apprenticeship, and how he eventually got the job from the most powerful family in Florence to paint the most important altarpiece in the city. The story begins around 1476 in the Italian Renaissance city of Florence. At this point, Leonardo had already created some remarkable drawings and paintings, but he was still only 15 years old and untrained. Now, in those days, if you wanted to become a professional artist, you had to find yourself a workshop, basically an artistic Hogwarts where you could learn the trade. So Leonardo, eager to be trained, goes to Florence and seeks out Andrea del Verrocchio, probably the greatest artist in the city. Verrocchio ran a large workshop which, in addition to painting and sculpture, also worked on gold leaf, mosaics, and more. Among his students were the future great painter Perugino, the sculptor and painter of Michelangelo, and yes, Leonardo da Vinci. As a master, Verrocchio would oversee a number of projects at once, often working on several pieces at the same time. Since he couldn't possibly do everything himself, he farmed out various parts of his work to his assistants, including Leonardo, and it seems that he recognized the genius of the young man immediately, giving him the most important tasks, allowing him to learn by doing. It's said that when Leonardo entered the studio, Verrocchio noticed his skill, so he gave him a small marble statue of a demon to sculpt. If Leonardo did well, he would then become his apprentice. Well, according to Vasari, Leonardo spent 2 years on this little statue, and when it was finished, everyone was astonished at the quality of the work. Now remember that at this time, Leonardo was only between 15 and 17 years old. It's said that the statue was so beautiful that no one could bring themselves to destroy it. So they cast a bronze replica of it and kept the original marble as a treasure of the shop. Unfortunately, both statues were lost. But fortunately, we have a drawing made by Leonardo's contemporary showing us the famous marble demon, as well as other works from the Verrocchio workshop. Now, while Leonardo was sculpting this demo, Verrocchio was likely working on one of his most famous pieces, an equestrian statue of a commander of the Florentine army named Gattamelata. Verrocchio worked on this project for 8 years, back and forth from Florence to Venice, until finally the great bronze statue was unveiled in the Piazza della Signoria in Florence in 1482. This impressive statue of a victorious general on horseback is considered the first freestanding bronze equestrian statue since antiquity. In other words, it was over 500 years since the ancient Greeks sculpted a bronze horse, and now Verrocchio had just done it. To say that this was a triumphant moment would be an understatement. In fact, it's been described as one of the greatest artistic events of the Renaissance, and young Leonardo was there assisting his master in the creation of this great masterpiece. We can imagine that he stood in awe watching his master ride high on the success of this great statue. But shortly after its unveiling, Verrocchio got an offer he couldn't refuse. The next richest and most powerful family in Florence after the Medici was the powerful Sforza family of Milan, and their duke was looking for a new artist to take over. Since Verrocchio was busy with other projects, he recommended Leonardo as his replacement, launching his career. It's said that he was only paid 20 florins per year, but Verrocchio insisted that the Duke pay for his training as well. Leonardo was officially hired by the Duke in September of 1482 and spent the next 4 years in Milan. He quickly gained recognition for his talent and ingenuity. At court, he was given access to the best materials and the finest models. There, he developed his mastery of emotion and linear perspective, culminating in his masterpiece, The Last Supper. Now, it's believed that Leonardo was about 30 years old when he completed this work, but keep in mind that he didn't receive any classical education. He never went to university. His learning was entirely practical and hands-on. He learned about the world through direct experience, autopsies, and dissections. So, when you consider this, it becomes even more amazing that at age 30, he was able to produce this kind of work. But The Last Supper wasn't the only great work he produced during this time. In Milan, he also produced one of the most famous drawings in the world, the Vitruvian Man. According to legend, Leonardo was sitting in a monastery copying some books when he came across a passage in Vitruvius's book called De Architectura, which describes the ideal proportions of the human body. Leonardo was so excited that he jumps up from his desk, runs to his paper, and draws this iconic image of the perfect human body, inscribing the correct measurements from Vitruvius's text. I should mention here that this isn't actually what Vitruvius wrote. What he wrote was the ratio between the length of a man and the diagonal of the square he inhabits. But anyway, this drawing is so iconic that I don't think I need to explain what it means. It's literally the ideal proportions of the human body as described by Roman architect Vitruvius. But there's much more going on here than meets the eye. Leonardo's proportions are actually spot on, based on a study done by Kenneth Clark and later Lucio Gilli. However, Leonardo made minor tweaks to make the drawing look more aesthetically pleasing. This slight deviation from accuracy is very characteristic of Leonardo, always tweaking and improving upon existing ideas. It's also worth noting that this drawing is more than just proportions. For example, Leonardo shows the ideal male and female body facing forward, to the side, and in three-quarter views. He also notes the center of gravity of the body as well as the center of gravity of each limb. This is a remarkable work, but it's far from Leonardo's only scientific drawing. His notebooks contain hundreds of pages filled with inventions, observations, and drawings, all of which show Leonardo's insatiable curiosity and desire to understand the world around him. For example, one of the most famous drawings in the Codex Leicester is his study of water, showing how water flows around rocks and forms eddies and vortices. Another drawing shows the relationship between reflected light and ambient light, which helps us better understand how Leonardo created effects of light and shadow in his paintings. There's simply no end to the wonders hidden inside these notebooks, including early versions of inventions like the helicopter and tank, as well as his studies of anatomy, geology, and more. Anyway, after completing about 15 works for the court of Milan, Leonardo moved on. Why? Well, the Duke was assassinated, and Leonardo was afraid that the new ruler might not be so fond of him. So he decided to move to Rome and join the famous painter Verrocchio on a project to decorate rooms in the Vatican Palace. As exciting as this sounds, Leonardo ended up getting bored. He was used to being the hotshot in town, but in Rome, he was just another guy in a big workshop. So after just a few months, he headed back north. And this brings us to the end of part 1. Next time, we will discuss Leonardo's return to Florence and his masterpiece, The Adoration of the Magi, as well as his later years in Tuscany and his strange obsession with the Arno River. In the last video, we saw Leo at the height of his powers completing the Last Supper. But what happened next? Well, after finishing the Last Supper, he started working on his next great masterpiece, but it would be 5 years before it was finished. Why? Because Leonardo went crazy. Not literally, though. He just became obsessed with science and engineering. Between 1498 and 1502, he dissected over 30 human cadavers, discovering many new things about the heart and its valves, as well as mapping out the inside of the skull. In fact, he discovered so much that scientists today are still comparing his findings with their own modern techniques. One of his notebooks contains the following drawing and notes. At the top, you can see an eye looking into a mirror. and below that, another eye looking into the eye in the mirror. That's right. Leonardo was the first person to realize that when you look into someone else's eye, what you see is not your own face, but a reflection of their own. But while studying anatomy, he also invented all sorts of things like this flying machine, or ornithopter, as well as this aerial screw, both of which were designed to help humans fly like a bird or an insect. In fact, he even studied birds extensively, dissecting one to see how the bones inside were structured. In addition, he studied the destructive power of water, building canals, dams, and bridges, as well as working as a military engineer and cartographer for Cesare Borgia, the son of Pope Alexander VI. So, what was the Last Supper originally called? Well, since there was no title given to it by Leonardo, art historians now call it the Last Supper because it depicts the moment when Jesus announces that one of his disciples will betray him. But who is this mysterious disciple? Well, that's exactly what we'll explore in our third and final video coming soon. But for now, let's go back to Leonardo's last years in France. As mentioned, it took him 5 years to complete the masterpiece that would become known as the Mona Lisa. But why? What made this painting take so long? Well, it was because he wanted it to be perfect, so much so that he ended up changing the subject entirely. You see, the original plan was to paint a young woman named Lisa Gherardini, the wife of a wealthy silk merchant. However, during the painting, Leonardo decided that he liked the sfumato effect he had created around her eyes so much that he changed the entire painting. Now the sitter is most likely Lisa, but the landscape in the background, the way it blurs into the distance, and the overall mystery of the painting are what makes it so special. It's no wonder that when the Mona Lisa was finally unveiled, the crowds gathered around it in amazement. When asked how he did it, Leonardo replied, "I worked very hard on it." But we know that wasn't the whole truth, because as always, he was also busy with science. In fact, he performed a total of 7 anatomical dissections in France, probably using cadavers that were supplied to him by the French king. He also continued inventing, designing a robot, a mechanical horse that could move, and even simulating muscle movement through string. In fact, he even drew a robot, which is crazy considering that robots didn't exist until almost 500 years later. Sadly though, Leonardo never finished the mechanical horse. In fact, he died in 1519, without ever seeing the invention built. But his legacy lived on through his inventions, discoveries, and paintings, inspiring scientists and artists alike for centuries to come. In our final video, we'll take a closer look at the Mona Lisa and uncover some of its secrets. We'll also learn about the turbulent life of Leonardo, his illegitimate son, and the reason why he never married. So make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for watching. And once again, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a like and consider supporting us through other means. Your support helps us to continue creating content. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.